a storytelling concert featuring the storytellers from Yours Truly. Now, my mom always said when I wrote a letter to sign it, to sign off, like Love and Sincerely Yours, or Yours Truly. And so I thought Yours Truly would be a good name for the workshop because it's personal stories that we focus on. And I've got to salute these 8 tellers today because we all helped each other dig into our memories. And it's not always an easy task to do that, and sometimes you discover things that you hadn't thought about before you started digging and before other people questioned you. So it's a wonderful group to be part of. I'm so glad to be part of it and making new friends along the way. So we have 8 tellers. I'm going to introduce each teller with a quote that they have chosen. The first teller chose a quote from John F. Kennedy. Tolerance implies no lack of commitment to one's own beliefs. Rather, it condemns the oppression or persecution of others. She tells a story entitled Gung Hei Fat Choi. Welcome, Eileen Fiore.
Shout out because I think they're watching. Jay and Diane, I think, are watching from New York. You said them, yeah. Okay. Gung Hei Fat Choi. 4 chow mein sandwiches for table 3, TK. Here's the receipt for 10 chow mein sandwiches at table 4. A little background. I lived in a 3-tenement house owned by my grandfather, who was an Italian immigrant. He owned 2 of those houses. We lived on the 1st floor, Grandma, Grandpa on the 2nd floor, and Aunt Jill and Uncle Ernest on the 3rd floor. And TK was the owner of the only Chinese restaurant in town. A little background. I lived in that tenement house, and my address was 39 Water Street, which bordered the Narragansett Bay, parallel to it. There were no zoning laws, so the street looked like this. Starting from the intersection of Main Street, there was a liquor store, a tenement house, a street, another tenement house, a barber shop, and so on down the whole street until you got to the beach. Our immediate area where I lived was an Italian ghetto in the best sense of the word. And then the next group down the street, going down the street, were all French. And then the next group were all Polish. And then the next group, there were English, Irish. And I'm sure that everybody stayed together in their group for community and support. They were all immigrants. The interesting thing was that every single one of those ethnicities had their own church. So there was an Italian church, a French church, a Polish church, St. Mary's Church, and plus all the other. There was a Baptist church and a Presbyterian church for a very small town. It was pretty amazing. The restaurant was literally around the corner from my house. TK was smart enough to adapt the menu, hence the chow mein sandwich, which was a scoop of a hamburger bun with a scoop of chow mein sauce that contained celery, onions, and bean sprouts and crispy noodles, smothered over that bottom part and the top put on. But the best part was that gravy soaked that bottom half. It was, really quite delicious. So they were 25 cents. taking a long time. Okay, TK, I'll take care of it. After a year of working there, TK took a trip to China, and he wanted to marry. And of course, there were no other Chinese families, at least in town, maybe in the city. When he returned, he had a wife and she had a son, Helen, and the son was Gam, and Gam was my age. And he was, just had this wonderful round face, and he always had a little smile on it, and shuffled when he walked, this sheepish grin. I always thought he was flirting with me just a little bit. Helen and Gam did all the cooking, while TK stood where? At the register, right. Helen learned to drive, and what I'm going to say sounds a little judgmental, but our town was made up of two-way street, two lanes. And TK bought her a very long station wagon. And so when she drove down that street, people kind of moved out of the way. And I'm really not kidding, they did. It's a stereotype, I know, but Helen and Gam worked like slaves in that kitchen. Gam had long tools in his hand, like extensions of his arm, sauteing vegetables in the oversized wok. In the very back of the restaurant, they grew their own bean sprouts, trays and trays of bean sprouts to supply the restaurant. They also made their own almond cookies. You know the little golden color cookies? Theirs were homemade. And before they hardened and cooled, my job was to put the half almond in the middle of the cookie. This was the best part. Once a year, the restaurant was transformed. Authentic, bright red lanterns hung from the ceiling. There was a gong at the front of a very long table that had been set. TK closed up the restaurant, invited all of the employees. Then the real food was served, and they had chopsticks. I have to tell you, at 16 in Warren, Rhode Island, I had never heard or seen a pair of chopsticks. And their dexterity was amazing, but we all used forks. It was friends and families like my own holidays, and I loved it. Many nights when I came home from work, my mother would say, go change your clothes, you smell like chow mein, hurry up. But the funniest thing that happened when I left on a Saturday night was TK would sing, "Good night, Irene, good night. Good night, Irene." Well, my name is Eileen. I never asked how he knew that song, but I grew to love that family. A family similar to mine, in that they were immigrants and they're willing to work very hard. Just within the last year, I received an obituary. One of my high school friends sent me Gam's obituary. And it was bittersweet. He had married, he had 4 children, he had grandchildren. He must have taken over the restaurant after TK died and owned a house in the back of the restaurant. And it was so comforting to hear that he had led a good life, because I'm sure those first 16 years in China were not wonderful. And the way he worked in the back of that restaurant in the kitchen was hard work. I loved the experience. I cherished the experience. They were different in so many ways, but in so many ways the same. Their food was different. They had bok choy, we had pasta and eggplant. I still reminisce about that chow mein sandwich, and I love telling this story. But most of all, I relish the experience of another family, not so different from my own. Gong Hei Fat Choi, wishing you great happiness and prosperity.
glad to hear a story like that. Our next storyteller chose a quote from Marie Kondo. When you are choosing what to keep, ask your heart. When you are choosing where to store something, ask your house. She tells a story entitled Hoarder. Her name is Karen Perkel. Please welcome her.
Thanks. The other day, my friend told me my voicemail was full. And I thought she meant my cell, but she said, no, your landline. And she told me the same thing a couple months before, but I just thought she was confused. It had to be my cell. You know, for the last several months, maybe even a half a year, I thought all the calls I was getting on that archaic old thing were spam because no one left a message. It took me a couple days, but I thought I'd better check it out. So I called it with my cell, and sure enough, I got a message saying something like, customer cannot receive messages, voice mailbox full. Wow, okay, so she was right. So I went over to my saved messages thinking I would delete the 3 or 4 that were there and all would be fine. The first message was from Mike, the owner of the property management company that managed my building 2 property management companies ago. And Mike could talk. I thought maybe I'd saved it because it was really important, but after listening to Mike's 5-minute message apologizing to me for not getting back to me earlier because he'd been on vacation, I realized all Mike really said was, hey, it's Mike getting back to you. Sorry it wasn't sooner. And I saved it for legal reasons, but I listened to the whole thing and Mike didn't divulge a thing, not even where he went on vacation. So that was easy. I hit 3 and goodbye, Mike. And it just sort of went like that. Kira asking me if I knew of a good writing workshop. Call her back. She was somewhere unintelligible. I played it twice to try to figure out where she was, but couldn't tell. Somewhere she called the armpit of the world. She'd be in the car for an hour and a half, and I should call her back. I wondered if I ever did. Were these just obligations I had never met? Right after Kira was Kira again. The guilt. There were several from Blue Shield. So many that after a while, as soon as I heard the area code, I hit 3 and got rid of them. They were reminding me of an important health appointment I needed to make. Probably a mammogram or a colonoscopy, something. I guess like a nagging parent, I just sort of ignore them and put them on the I'll listen to that later list, but saving it here will remind me. Yeah. I don't even have that same health insurance anymore. And I guess it was pretty nice of the recorded robot voice to care about my health so much. I've had those tests since then and I'm fine. Thanks for worrying about me. There was a message from me. I had no idea who me was. She was checking in with me, letting me know she was okay and doing everything she was supposed to be doing. I guess I was her boss back then or something. I don't know. She was in Hawaii. Good enough. I let her go. The next message was from a friend of mine who sounded so happy. She's lived through so much since then. She was laughing and telling me she'd see me soon at the Earth Cafe in Pasadena. And she wanted me to stay with her that night at the Huntington Hotel in Pasadena. Her friend was also laughing in the background. We were going to our alma mater, Art Center, to attend a lecture that her friend, a well-known artist and her former professor and mentor, was giving. Her voice brought me back to those fun times. My first return to Art Center since graduating 40 years before. That school was hard, grueling in fact, and I had never wanted to go back, and never had. But it seemed with the help of a friend I could. We toured the campus and peeked in all the studios. Even at night, the kids were there, slaving away. After the lecture, Kim and I bought junk food and went back to the hotel and watched stupid movies on TV. The grounds of the Huntington were beautiful. We walked around them the next day before and after brunch. Her message brought back wonderful memories, and Kim was laughing. I hate to say it, but I hit pound and saved it again. The next message was from my insurance company. Car, not health. And that made me laugh in itself. Kim had rear-ended me as I was leaving her out of the hotel and onto the freeway. Next, USAA, her insurance company. Then Kim again, still laughing. We were meeting for lunch or dinner, something. She was verifying. Even though I could hear the smile in her voice that has since been mostly wiped out, I deleted it. 45 minutes later, I had to stop listening to my messages. I had a 5:15 Zoom to get to. But it made me think, what kind of junk am I going to be leaving behind for my descendants? My overflowing email boxes, my notebooks full of unfinished poetry, handwriting even I can't read, stuff I get in the mail, vow to read later, or use that coupon, or investigate whether I want to vote for that proposition or not. I have people in my contacts that are dead, but I just can't delete them. After my mother died, we tried to delete her from Facebook, but they wanted us to show a death certificate, etc., etc., and it just seems so unimportant among all the other things. She still pops up every once in a while on my FB, urging me to wish her a happy birthday. I purposely allowed my uncle's page to stay up. He has students from the 1960s and 70s that like to post remembrances and tributes to him. When my brother died, he was buried in a natural cemetery, a forest of sorts. He lies among people's cats and dogs. He would have liked that. He was always an animal lover. It's supposed to be more ecologically sound, so he'll be leaving way less junk behind. But me? Am I a cyber hoarder? I mean, I have so many things I can't let go of. I have messages from my nieces when they were kids. They call me auntie, and their voices are different. Those are times we'll never get back. On my cell, I have a message from Ben and David, both dead. So if you call me and my voicemail is full, please don't fault me. I'm just sentimental. Maybe one of them will be you, from back in the good times. We made plans to get together, see each other. There they'll be, hanging out on my cloud or Spectrums or Apples, whoever the keeper is of these things. You may be in a land or a galaxy far, far away, but I need you, so I'm not going to erase you. I'm keeping you here with me, that you. The one before all that other shit happened, to help me get through when that shit happens to me.
Thank you, Karen. It gives new meaning to hoarding. I thought I just had to go through my cabinets. Our next teller has a quote from Dr. Seuss. Sometimes you will never know the value of a moment until it becomes a memory. She tells a story entitled, Where Did the 11-Year-Old Girl Go? Welcome Lydia Cruz Motlett.
I grew up in a very bad neighborhood in San Juan, Puerto Rico. When I was was 11 years old, my world consisted of family, the home, and my public school. We couldn't afford many things. We are not in extreme poverty that we couldn't eat. We did have that. But we had the minimum. For instance, we couldn't afford movies or going to restaurants. There were no organized sports. And forget about art and music. We didn't even have parks nearby. My father would tell us, I only went to 3rd grade, and I want something better for each one of the 6 of you. And you all are going to school, whether you like it or not. I dreamed of being an elementary school teacher, so I had to go to college, and to travel around the world. So even though I love school, I hated the 10-minute walk there and coming back. See, my sister Maria, who was 10, and I were in charge of taking the kids to school and back. And that included my siblings, my cousins, and my neighbors. Going there in the morning to school wasn't bad, it was coming back. When we got out of school, on one side we had all the junkies, and on the other side of the street were the drunks, and in between many weird people. We tried to walk as fast as possible. Sometimes we ran and I hated them. I hated them because we were scared of them. Of course, now as an adult, I know that they were struggling worse than we did. But at that time, we tried to run and walk as fast as possible. And as soon as we saw Joe's Bar, we knew our alley was back there. My alley was in a maze of many alleys. There were about 7 houses in our particular alley. The houses were made out of wood with corrugated tin roofs. On one side, my left side, lived my aunt and uncle with 9 cousins. On the other side lived my grandpa and grandma. And grandma was very, very sick, and the family had to take care of her. There were also other houses and neighbors, and we got along pretty well. I was counting, and I thought we were like 22 kids in that small area. And we had a good time there. As a child, I did. Lucky for us, our parents encouraged us to be creative and to be resourceful. So I remember we sang songs and danced and wrote plays and presented them to our little neighborhood, our little alley. But I have one of my favorite memories to share with you. It was a very hot July day in San Juan. And as kids, we're feeling sticky, stinky, and sweaty. The house felt like a hot oven. All of a sudden, we heard pitter patter on the roof. It started to rain. We look at each other, we look at our mom to beg her to let us go out and play, and of course she said, "Biden said, go ahead." And I remember going out there and enjoying the rain in our skins. It was so refreshing. And of course, we ran around, we jumped in puddles. And I remember putting my hand over the rain guard to catch the rain on my head. And we would take turns to do that. And I think this is a precious moment for me because we were so innocent and naive. We only had each other and the rain, and we had such a great time. But not everything was fun in our alley. One day we heard a commotion. And kids, we ran out to check out what was happening. My father was yelling at two guys. My father yelling. He was telling the guys, you better get out of here. Don't you see there are many children? See, it was two junkies who were trying to have drug deals in our alley. And they were trying to also use the drugs there. One of the junkies turned and said, who are you? You're not the owner of the alley. At that moment, my father told my mother, take the kids inside the house. And I remember looking through the cracks of the wooden side of my house, looking what was going on outside, and I saw my father pushing one of the junkies who fell down. And then the other guy helped him up. And the guy who fell down told my daddy, we're leaving now, but tomorrow we're coming back and we're chopping your head off. With that, we started to wail. And the two guys left and we ran out to be with our father. Our father, of course, tried to comfort us. He said, don't you worry about it. These are junkies. In 15 minutes, they will have forgotten everything that happened. The next day, we begged our father not to go to work, but he had to go. And what a relief when we saw him coming down the alley. We ran to embrace him, and my mother, who never cried, was crying and sobbing in his arms. But that particular, for me, was a traumatic experience. It helped a little bit. And by the way, my father gave us a lecture about that Nancy Reagan would have been proud of him. But it really helped, because thanks to that, I think, we didn't use drugs as 7, because we had a 7th child at the end, later on. We never used drugs, we don't abuse alcohol, and none of us smoke. And we're thankful in a way for that. We think we are successful. Everybody got a high school diploma at least. We have a couple who got master degrees, another person who has a business. Everybody has a career, a job. We are all good citizens, is the point. I had a bachelor's degree in Puerto Rico, and my friend Juanita, who lived in California in 1980, called me to tell me that they needed bilingual teachers in California. And I was young, I was ready to come have adventure. I was ready to mingle. And so I found a job. A few years later, I finished my master's degree in bilingual education. And I was able to invite my parents to come to my graduation at Cal Lutheran University. You should have seen their faces. I mean, they were so proud of me. But I was the one who was proud. They sacrificed their lives and dedicated their lives to us. And we really appreciate that. I not only got a master, but I also got a mister. That's important. My husband Dave is sitting back there. And with him, I've been able to complete my dream that besides becoming a teacher, I wanted to also travel around the world. And with him, we have done that. The little girl, the 11-year-old girl who grew up in a very bad neighborhood, is very happy that she has accomplished what her dreams, and she's very thankful. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. I'm glad your mister came today, too. Our next teller has a quote from herself. "My freedom was on the wings of waves." She tells a story entitled Freedom. Welcome, Patty Hollow.
So time, I thought it was later in the day. Well, better this way. This is called Freedom, and it's the story of my two grandmothers, both of whom vied for my attention. Gran was a British accent who thought she was brilliant, but really didn't get very many parts. Nana was a rich, nutty eccentric, but they both wished to claim me since I was the only grandchild of either. And they happened to be enemies who spoke very little, and only when needed. And it always became a battle of wills. And on some level, although Gran wanted to control my every move, Nana forgot where I was most of the time. Now it is the summer of 1950, and although I was being raised by the actress and my poor browbeaten father, I was on the verge of being temporarily homeless when Gran surprisingly, and really surprisingly, booked a 3-month summer musical tour and would be traveling for the whole summer. I was delighted to get away from her, as summer was the time she turned most of her attention onto me, and with everything, etiquette lessons, grooming to be the next Judy Garland, how to behave, how to curtsy, and worst of all, having to recite these silly little English Victorian ditties to perform for friends or agents who would listen to me. Smile, she'd say, enunciate clearly, and curtsy, and then begin. How do you do? How do you do? A gentleman asks on the boardwalk. Quite well, thank you. How are you? Like the sea, brolic blue. I've been waiting here for you. For me? Oh, I really think you're much too free. Well, anything is possible on a holiday by the sea. Say I know a place we can go for a space. That's if you've nothing on. Nothing on? Nothing on? Oh, what do you mean? Oh, I don't mean wrong. Sir, oh sir, I'm walking on that's telling you flat. Well, really, I won't bother you, dear. So there, that's that. So that went on, and that was just, and then I curtsied, and then I had to curtsy, and then I would listen to the polite applause by anybody who was made to listen to it over and over again. I mean, that was my particular act. Gran still had great hopes that I would one day become a star, and she would be my personal manager. Well, gratefully, that never happened, and I finally got away from her by the time I was in the 5th grade. Somehow, after exploring all the other possibilities who could possibly watch me, they came upon the decision to see if the other grandmother, who lived on the beach in Venice, would be willing to care for me for the summer. And even though they were barely speaking, I think they were desperate to find a babysitter. And she would have to do, even though they knew poor Nana had become increasingly nutty after the death of her daughter, my mother, whom I barely knew, from a few years before. So Gran drove me to Venice and started giving Nana instructions at the front door. Nana paid no attention to her. She grabbed me by the hand, left my Gran standing at the front door, and took me into her kitchen, which was slightly grubby and disorganized, but had the most wonderful smells emanating from the stove. She made pies. I think that's all she made, pies, but apple pie was the one I remember the most. And then we ate them for days and days and many days. In fact, I think it's the only thing I ever ate in her house was pie, some type of pie, probably apple or a fruit pie if it was in season. The rest of the time I was mostly alone, and then I headed for the beach and its gigantic waves, and taught myself how to surf, using my arms straight out in front of me, which had me going at great speeds, because I was lightweight and I could fly over those wings, and it was such a wonderful feeling. One day I saw a child's raft that was left on the beach, and I grabbed it, and I got daily bingo games if she remembered. But I also found a drawer stuffed in the kitchen with dollars for groceries and pie-making ingredients. I can't remember ever having another meal, but I never went hungry. The bank down the street handled her real money, which was left in a trust to pay her monthly expenses. Her very late, very wealthy, elderly husband knew she couldn't be trusted with money. And actually it worked out quite well. And I never went hungry. I mean, I might have been missed a few times, but I never went hungry, and I always had money to buy something. Occasionally Nana would go to meet me at the pier with me and watch me ride the merry-go-round, and when she wasn't playing bingo. One day, when I caught the golden ring that used to catch if you could get a free ride, and I reached really high, and I kept getting this golden ring, and that meant another free ride, and getting the golden ring, and I was so excited, and Nana finally got impatient and went like this. She wanted it to stop, and she said, "That boy is doing that on purpose because he wants you to stay here." I didn't know what she was talking about. And that is when the funniest thing she told me, very seriously, about boys, which I really had no interest in. But she told me, never, never put shiny dimes in your loafers because a boy might try to look up your skirt. I, of course, didn't know what she was talking about, nor did I care. And I thought she was acting a little crazy, but that's who she was. I mean, she was not quite there most of the time. Eventually, though, I did get sick, mostly run down, I guess, from everything. And unfortunately, my other grandmother, the actress home from her tour, finally found me at another house down the street that Nana had taken a fancy to. I remember we moved in a day, and she never bothered to mention it to anyone. Kidnapping was not intended, but she definitely had a way of doing things that had nothing to do or connected with anybody else. All the good times came to an end when the actress, Gran, showed up furious that she couldn't find me and had to search the neighborhood with a neighborhood lady for my relocation. She screamed when she finally saw me, looking like a homeless waif, very dirty, thin, and with a slight cough and fever. Of course, she was an actress, so she went crazy. "Oh my God, you've nearly killed her, you crazy old woman," she screamed at Nana. She couldn't stop herself and went on and on. Nana didn't seem to pay much attention to her, which sent Gran into another fit of anger. "Oh my God, look at you crazy old fool." I was helpless to do anything. I was so overpowered by them arguing back and forth, back and forth. After all, I was only a child caught between two wildly eccentric old ladies. I knew this was going to end badly from the minute my dear sweet son married your crazy daughter, just as crazy as you are. That did it, the final blow that had gotten Gran's wind up, and she couldn't stop. "I should call the authorities, you child murderer, you potential child murderer, you." She had really gotten so dramatic, and then she wanted to call this ambulance again, but when she found out how much it was, and she was very thrifty, she said no, she wasn't going to do that. Then poor Nana jumped in. "Tell her what fun we had, dearie. Tell her what fun we had," Nana begged, once again trying to get my attention. I tried, but by then I was just too weak, and I had lost my voice, and I started to cry. After all, I was only 8 years old, caught between two wildly eccentric old ladies. "I have to get you out of here," Gran screamed. "This place is teeming with germs." It wasn't really, but being the actress she was, she couldn't give up her performance. All I could remember was what a fun time I'd had. That's what I remembered. But she grabbed an old blanket and pushed me into her old Dennis Plymouth and started to drive away. And there was Nana running alongside the car, trying to give me her last piece of pie, which we don't know how old it was. And I shook my head and I blew her a kiss. I did recover after a while, and it took a while. And the general consensus was that I had mononucleosis, which I think wasn't even completely well known at that time, from poor Nana's innocent neglect, but Gran could not resist telling everyone, all the agents, all her actor friends, telling everyone it wasn't her fault. She just never knew how crazy Nana was. And once again calling her potential child killer. This was, of course, her way of not taking blame for herself, for leading me there in the first place. It's called COV, cover her ass, and that's what she did. And that was that. I never saw Nana again, but she lived to 103 and was found being kept by a family in downtown LA and paid for by the Never Ending Trust. But the most remarkable thing happened was 30 years later, the bank and the trust people finally found me, verified who I was, and gave me enough money to put my daughter through college. $80,000, a virtual fortune at the time. No one knows to this day how much money she had, or how much money was spent, or how many people were using her money, honest or otherwise. But for me, it was just a great memory of that strange, happy summer of big waves, hot dogs, and dubious pies.
You're a good baker too, Patty, but you don't make dubious pies. Our next teller has a quote, "Truth is stranger than fiction." She tells a story entitled Mama and Frank. Welcome, Shirley Norkin.
I grew up watching movies, and I knew Joan Crawford and Betty Davis better than I knew my own mother. Mama always said, "I want you to be a movie star." But I think she wanted to be a movie star, and she never got what she wanted. So I grew up as an only child, making up for the many disappointments she had with me. When I was 9 years old, she took me to an audition at MGM. And she got all dressed up, and I think she wanted to be discovered. It took us 2.5 hours to get there by train, actually streetcar. And when we got there, there was Rosalie Petrano, my worst nightmare. She was the perfect dancer with gorgeous legs, and Mama always used to compare me to her. "Why can't you dance like Rosalie Petrano?" And I couldn't. And when I got home, she would beat the hell out of me with a hanger. When I was 16, I became extremely depressed. I couldn't concentrate, and my grades deteriorated. And she used to send me out the door to school with starched dresses and Buster Brown shoes. And all the girls wore these gorgeous cashmere sweaters and stylish slippers. My girlfriend Barbara was a saint. She used to say, "Don't worry about those girls. They're just snobs. They don't know how wonderful you are." Daddy buried himself in work, and he was terrified of Mama. My mom was addicted to diet pills, and sometimes she would get completely out of control. And one night when he came home a little late, she started throwing pots and pans at him and hit him in the head, and we had to call an ambulance. Later on in life, he developed severe stomach ulcers. He should have left, but in those days, you didn't hear about divorce. You just didn't do it. You stuck it out, and that's exactly what he did. I knew if I didn't escape, she would kill me one way or another. It was spring break, and my girlfriend Barbara said, let's go to Palm Springs. My folks have a house there. With one foot out the door, I yelled to Mama, I'm leaving. I'm going to stay at Barbara's for a few days. And before she could say anything, I was out. I would worry about it later. When we got there, she loaned me some of her beautiful clothes, and we got all dressed up, and we went to see Bobby Short at Marion Davies' Desert Inn. He was my favorite singer, and I was so excited to see him. And as we're walking up the path, there was a man leaning against the door with his hat tilted over his head. And I was blinded by his amazing blue eyes. He grabbed me by the arm and he says, you're late. I was waiting for you. And I pulled my arm away and I hurried in, shaking, realizing that that man was Frank Sinatra. And I saw Barbara, and she was sitting by the piano where Bobby Short was performing. And at the next table was Katharine Hepburn, Spencer Tracy, Lauren Bacall, Humphrey Bogart, and Marlene Dietrich. And Frank walked in and joined them. Moments later, Frank's bodyguards came over to the table and asked us to join them. And I vehemently said, no. What am I going to say to these people? I've been watching your movies for the rest of my life? Barbara was very unhappy. But the next day we went back, and I was hoping he'd be standing at the door again. But we went in and we were escorted to our table, and he was standing with the same group of people. And a few minutes later, his bodyguards came over again and asked us to join their table. And before I could say anything, Barbara was sitting between Humphrey Bogart and Spencer Tracy. And I was sitting there conspicuously alone. And I looked up, and there were those gorgeous eyes staring at me, and he sat down, and he said, my name is Frank Sinatra. I said, my name is Shirley. And we started to talk, and we talked, and we talked. We talked about our mothers, mostly talking about our mothers and how terrible they were. And finally, the night went by, and Barbara was standing there, and it was late, and he said, why don't you come back to our house? Why don't you come back to my house? And I said, no. I said, I don't think that's a very good idea. And he said, well, can I call you at home? I said, you can call me in Los Angeles. I'll be there tomorrow night. So we parted company, and I thought, oh, I'll never hear from him again. And the next night the phone rang, and it was him. And we talked about our mothers again. We talked about music and how much I wanted to be a singer, but my mother insisted that I take dancing. And we talked about art and how I loved to do watercolor and he loved to do oil. And finally, it was getting late, and he said, I think we should say goodnight. And I said to myself, how could I have so much in common with a man 30 years older than myself and the most famous singer in the world? And we hung up. And a few minutes later, he called back and he said, you deserve a better life. I'm going to make that happen for you. I want you to move in with me. And without even thinking, I said, yes. I hung up and I walked into my bedroom dazed. And the next week, he had his bodyguard pick me up. And I told Mama that I was leaving. I had my bag all packed. And she ran into the bedroom and locked the door. And Daddy was standing at the door crying, and he said, I'll always have a place for you here. Your bed will always be waiting for you. And I threw my arms around him, and I left to my new life. When we got to the new place that I was going to live at, which was in West Hollywood, Frank's bodyguard said, why don't you make yourself at home? And he took me to the bedroom, and there were gift boxes all over the place. And I started opening them up, and there were beautiful cashmere sweaters and slippers and a lot more. And I put one of the sweaters on and the slippers, and I went into the living room, and I was amazed. There was no plastic on the furniture. My mother covered everything in plastic. And I went over to the sofa, and I lied down, and I curled up, and I thought to myself, I escaped. I'm finally safe. And I fell asleep, and when I opened my eyes, Frank was sitting there staring at me. And he said, I thought we'd do takeout. And I said, great. And I didn't even know what takeout was. So we sat there eating and listening to Tony Bennett records, and I said to myself, I'm Cinderella. Just like the movies, I'm Cinderella. Well, Frank's bodyguard took me to school and brought me home. And all the girls in school that shunned me were now all over me. They wanted to be my friend because of my beautiful clothes. And my grades started to improve, and I started to get A's. And Frank would say, I want you to have everything that I never had when I was growing up. I only saw him about 3 days a week. And when we went out, it was always with his friends because he wanted me to be a well-kept secret. But the thing I loved the most was going to his recording sessions. I could sit for hours listening to his music. It was the most wonderful thing I've ever heard. I accepted what kind of a life he had, with children and beautiful women and alcohol. But he was so good to me. It didn't make any difference. And even though it might have been a strange relationship, I was very happy with him. And I know he was happy with me too. He used to say, you're my muse. I reconnected with my mother, finally. And I told her I was living with Frank Sinatra. And she kept her cool, even though she was shocked. And she said, you know, I never liked the way Frank Sinatra sang. He's never been my favorite singer. Why couldn't you move in with Eddie Fisher, who was Jewish? And I said, oh, that's my mother. Finally, it was graduation. graduation, and Frank picked my parents up, and we all went to my graduation. And I dreaded the two of them meeting, but she was very, very charismatic, very cool. And my dad didn't say anything at all. So we went through the graduation, and Frank took them home. And then he whisked me away to Las Vegas, where he was opening up the Sands Hotel. He got me all dressed up and sat me in the third row amongst all these stars. And he started to sing all these songs to me. All or nothing at all. Have a love never appealed to me. If your love never would yield to me. Oh, I'd rather have nothing at all. Oh my God, I thought I was going to faint, and all the women were swooning in the theater. It was the most exciting night of my entire life, and there will never be anything to replace it, ever. And after the show, he came over to me and he said, "How was I?" I couldn't believe that he said that to me. And I threw my arms around him, and I thought to myself, move over, ladies, it's my turn. Well, for the next 2 weeks, we spent a lot of time together, and our relationship completely changed. And then I got a call from my mother. She said, "Now what?" A chill ran through me as I hung up, and I kept thinking about those words, now what? 2 weeks after that, Frank hands me this letter over Jennifer. Dear Frank, I want you to know I appreciate what you've done for my daughter, but it's time you end this relationship with her. If you continue, it will ruin her life. She will have no one to replace you. I know you'll never marry her. If you continue on, no one else will. Please end this relationship. I knew she'd get her revenge. I knew it. And this letter was the revenge. She was going to spoil everything that I was enjoying so much, my dream. And Frank was terrified of my mother. He was afraid what she could do to him because I was so young, and I met him when I was only 16 years old. So he got me an apartment close by to where we were living, and he took care of me for a few years, and he got me this fantastic job at Columbia Pictures, taking care of the stars. And that's what they did in those days. They took very good care of their stars. And it was an unbelievable job. I had such a great time. And I was able to take my mother to the commissary and meet all these stars and take her to big movie events. And I even introduced her to Eddie Fisher, who I eventually started working for. And I stopped counting petals on flowers because I knew I would never find out if she loved me. I'll just pretend she does. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. Now what we're going to do is not touch the mic. Nobody touch the mic anymore.
this better?
Yeah.
Fine, okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. You were, it was the story. Our next teller has a quote from Bill Benott. How we walk with the broken speaks louder than how we sit with the great. She tells a story entitled A Single Tear. Welcome, Shifra Wilder.
It was March 1971. And I was turning 9 in July. My oldest brother Stephen had just turned 20. My brother Scott was turning 19 in August. My brothers were always getting in trouble. Well, Stephen was a good brother. You could often see police cars in front of our house at the end of Athens Drive in Saugus, Massachusetts. One time I heard that my brother Scott had to go to jail. And I thought, how cool is that? I mean, what other kid in my 3rd grade class had a brother going to jail? My family dynamics were interesting. Nobody knew how to communicate. We rarely looked at each other. In fact, I was in my early 20s before a friend said to me, "Why don't you look me in the eyes?" I had no idea I was supposed to. And even now, I still feel a little awkward and I look away. Mom and Dad, they really talked to each other, unless they were arguing. And they didn't really, I never saw them kiss or physically interact with each other. And my dad he was crude. He was vulgar. He was volatile. And behind my closed bedroom door at night, I could hear my dad yelling at my brothers and hear hitting and banging against the walls. And I just felt so helpless. I wasn't able to defend my brothers. And the next morning, when I woke, I would walk into the hallway and examine the holes in the bathroom door with my fingers. But with me, Dad was so different. I was Daddy's little girl. We could sit in silence and just feel the unconditional love. We understood each other. We could just be ourselves. And Dad he would take me to his bakery on Sundays. He owned a bakery. And he taught me how to make eclairs and half-moon cookies. And I could frost one side with the chocolate and the other half with vanilla frosting. And Dad was a gambler. I mean, he was a legit gambler. When he had money, he bought a Cadillac. When he didn't, we were walking on eggshells. And he would tell me, "Sweetheart, when you go to the casino someday in Vegas, you gotta go to the blackjack table. And the dealer, he'll give you 2 cards. And if you get an ace, and a queen, and a jack, or a king, it equals 21, and you got blackjack, and you win. But if you have too many cards and you go over that, you're out." Well, my mother and I had a different relationship. We really loved each other. But she was a bit of a perfectionist. She taught me to clean and to cook and to sew. But she had a lot of fear. And there were always rules. Don't run in the house. Don't ride your bike too fast. And a free spirit like me, I did not like rules. My best friends, Ricky and Ronnie Scher, they lived up the street from me. They were identical twins. And they were about a year older than I. They were turning 10 in June. And it was on March 14th, their dad took us bowling. And we bowled all day long. And after bowling, Dad took us back to their house and we had dinner, which was odd. I'd been to their house many times for lunch, but usually not dinner. So after dinner, we went to Ricky and Ronnie's bedroom and I looked down the street and I noticed there's all these cars parked in front of my house. I just thought, my brothers are probably in trouble again. So Mrs. Sher took me down to my house, and we walked into the living room, and my relatives were there. I saw my aunt and uncles and cousins and some neighbors, and I saw my mother, and she had a black dress, and her eyes were swollen. I could tell she had been crying, and she hugged me, and she said, "Honey, Mrs. Sher's gonna put you to bed tonight, okay?" I said, "Okay." So Mrs. Sher lovingly put her arm around my shoulder and walked me down the hall, past everyone. And I went into the bathroom, and I noticed all the bathroom mirrors were covered with bed sheets. So what is going on? The mirrors are covered, and there's people at my house. What's happening? And Mrs. Sher said, "Oh, honey, your mother has a headache, and she didn't want to look at herself, so she'll talk to you about it in the morning." So I went to my bedroom, and I got into bed, and she kissed my forehead and said, "Good night, honey. Sweet dreams." And she quietly closed the bedroom door. Well, I woke the next morning from what seemed to be a dream. And I half walked and half tiptoed down the hall, through the kitchen, and stood outside Mom and Dad's bedroom door, and I peered through the crack in the door. And Mom said, "Come on in." So I walked in, and I stood perplexed at the foot of their king-size bed. And she called me to her side. And she said, "Honey, something really bad happened. Stephen was at a party last night, and he died. And he's not coming home, and you're not going to see him again." I started laughing. I said, "She's got to be joking. Stephen's the good brother." And so she said, "No, honey, this really happened. Steve's dead, and he's not coming back home." So I looked at my father for confirmation, and there I saw it. It was a single tear flowing slowly down his cheek. And I was taken aback. I had never seen my father cry before, so I knew it must all be true. And later that day was my brother's funeral, but I wasn't allowed to go. So over the next week, people were coming into our house, and relatives, and my brother's friends, and my aunt told me that the reason the mirrors were covered in the bathroom with sheets was it was a Jewish tradition, and when somebody dies, we don't want to see the sadness in our eyes, so we cover the mirrors. Okay? And then my mom said we were sitting Shiva. I said, "Shiva? Why would anyone want to sit and shiver?" She didn't communicate, and I didn't ask. And then I heard my aunt whisper to my uncle, and she said, "Stephen's death was a suicide." Suicide? I'd never heard the word before. I hadn't a clue what it meant. Well, a few months went by, and it was June, and Mom dropped the bomb. She said, "You're gonna go to overnight camp for a month in New Hampshire." A month? This was the first time I'd ever been away from home. I mean, I loved YMCA day camp, but a whole month? Mom continued, "You'll meet new friends, and you'll play, and you'll swim. You know how you love to swim." Well, I so wanted to believe her, but I was painfully shy, and fear began to flood my body. And I said, "What am I gonna do?" I mean, I couldn't even cry at my brother's death when she told me to, and what is wrong with me? And I won't know anyone, and do I tell them that Stephen died? And could I bring my pillow? Like my father, we had this peculiar affection for our pillows. Well, we went shopping over the next couple of days for the items on the list for camp. And we got new sneakers, and new bathing suit, and new clothes, and this beautiful green steamer trunk. And it had brass edging and corners, and a lock and a brass key. And so the day finally arrived, and off to camp we went, this camp that I was beginning to dread. Well, we arrived at the camp, and there was counselors and camp directors and enthusiastically greeting us, and kids running around, and parents, and it was just all so overwhelming. Well, it was time for my parents to leave, and we hugged and we said our goodbyes, and I was just so scared. And I knew I had to be strong, so I faked it. Well, the camp counselor, she led me to cabin G16, and I was talking with other girls my age who I was desperately trying to remember their names. And I located my green trunk at the foot of my bed, and was thinking, I wonder if that trunk is as perplexed as I was just a few months ago, standing at the foot of my parents' king-size bed. Well, I carefully unpacked the trunk and took out my sneakers and bathing suit and new clothes, and where's my pillow? How could I have forgotten to pack my pillow? This can't be happening. I cannot believe it. I started crying. I silently just walked to the window and stared out at the lake, and I can't cry about my brother's death, but I can cry about leaving a pillow home. Well, I knew I had to make the best out of this horrible situation, and I didn't want the other girls to see me cry, so I just wiped the tears from my eyes. I started acclimating to camp life, and I took a liking to tetherball. And I could take that ball and slam it with my fist and watch the ball on the rope wrap around to the top. And I was about to slam that ball again, and I hear off in the distance, "Hey, Precious!" It was Dad. I ran into his arms, and we just embraced in a hug I never wanted to let go. And he said, "Sweetheart, you forgot your pillow." He drove the hour-and-a-half drive to bring me my pillow. Well, we had some small talk about camp life, and he said, "Honey," he's like, it's time for me to go. I got stuff to do. I gotta go home." So we hugged again, and I had muddled feelings. And as he turned to leave, I saw it. There was a single tear flowing slowly down his cheek. But this time, not for his son who is lost, but for his daughter who is still here.
Oh boy, there are all kinds of ways to communicate. I hope this is good. We have two more tellers, and this next one's quote is, "Life's greatest gifts are its hardest lessons." He tells a story entitled "The Parking Lot." Welcome, Sam Howell.
The parking lot, 5339 Melrose Avenue, Hollywood, California. What's in an address? Well, it's between Western Costume on the east and the Bronson Gate of Paramount Studios on the west. And directly across the street from California Studios, where they shot all the great cowboy movies at the time. Gunsmoke, Paladin, Rifleman. So basically, it was the hotbed of entertainment in Hollywood. In 1956, my older sister Cease had to go to Western Costume for a fitting for the Las Floristas Ball. And my mom was going to take her, my dad would drive. He had recently retired from his grocery business. So the two of them went in for the fitting. My dad sat in a car, struck up a conversation with the parking lot owner. "How you doing? You counting your money?" Parking lot attendant said, "Well, right now it's pretty easy, but you ought to see it sometimes. They're 10 deep in the middle, and it's a little bit too much for me." My dad said, "Well, I just retired, and I got a lot of time on my hands. Why don't you sell me the business?" And they shook hands right there on the spot. My dad bought the business. So an hour later, my mom and sister came out, and he said, "Honey, I'm gonna work the rest of the day. I bought the business. I'll take a cab home for dinner." So they left. Now, my dad was a self-made man. He had immigrated to the United States from Lebanon, leaving when he was only 12 years old, basically to avoid the Turkish army having been conscribed into the Army. He traveled with his older cousin, and they traveled in steerage. Their goal was getting to the United States. When they arrived at Ellis Island, with just their name and their port of exit on their chests, they were refused entrance. So, not having any money and no place to stay, they hired on a tramp steamer going down the East Coast, and they would stop at each port and help unload and reload the goods. When they got to the Caribbean, they went all the way through. The end of the line was Monterrey, Mexico, and they both got off. They didn't know the language, they didn't know the country. They were starving, underweight, and sick. They met a very nice Mexican family that took them in that had a farm. They worked around the farm. And my dad spent 8 years in Mexico building a business. He would travel from town to town, goods from one village to the next village, and sell them on. Well, he met a Catholic priest who was also on a journey from town to town. And he took my father under his wing and said, "You're a nice young man." And my father told him, "I want to get into the United States." The priest said, "I know the American Council to Cuba. Go with me to Cuba and I'll get you in." So that's what he did. Went with him to Cuba. He met the American Council, and they got him into Key West. That's 1926. Landed in Key West. On his import papers it said, occupation, grocer. Destination, Detroit, Michigan, where his uncle had a store. So he started working in his uncle's store, and because of his good nature and hard work ethic, he really excelled. After a period of time, his uncle came to him and said, "Sam, you're doing such a great job. Why don't you buy my business?" He said, "Okay." So he took over the business. Now it's the Depression, and the business kept growing and growing. Why? Because my dad spoke 4 different languages. He spoke Arabic, English, Spanish, Italian, and Polish. And so all the different immigrants that would come in, they were like best friends. And his business grew and grew, but he didn't like the cold in Detroit. So in 1934, he decided to sell. He sold to his cousin, his uncle's son, who he had bought the business from, so it's full circle. And he left to come to California with $90,000 in cash, not $100 bills, ones, fives, 10s, and 20s in a suitcase. So when he got to California, he had to reinvest his money. So he found a really nice, sturdy building down on Vermont and bought the building. It was a block long, 3 stories, with 27 apartments and 9 stores down below. Opened up a grocery store again. Fast forward to my father buying the parking lot. He had all of that wonderful worldly go get 'em, and he had the smooth ability to deal with people. So he became one-on-one with a lot of the big stars. His most favorite was Ernest Borgnine. Whenever he came in, they'd always hug and talk in Polish. Another one of his good buddies was John Wayne. They always exchanged cigars. That was their thing. Dad would always have a cigar in his breast pocket and give one to Wayne. Wayne would give him one. One day, Tom Jones came in his big stretch limo. Really hot that day, 120 degrees. So his driver had it parked in the shade, kept the AC running. Tom comes up to my dad and says, "Sam, why don't you hop on in and take off a load? There's champagne on ice, and take care of my girlfriend, would you?" So he was always having these wonderful things happen to him in the parking lot. Hard work, but it really paid off. And at night, he would share some of his stories with us around the dinner table. One night, my mom said, "Honey, how was your day?" He said, "It was okay, but I had to lift Marilyn Monroe out of her car." She said, "You did what?" He said, "Yeah, I put one hand under her butt, the other one behind, and lifted her out. She had a tight skirt on. She could get in, her white T-bird, but she couldn't get out." My mom left the table in a huff. The parking lot changed hands between the family. I had an older brother and a younger brother. My older brother, Rich, took it on first in about 1960, having graduated from high school without having any other work to do. My dad would just stay in the background. The way Rich ran the parking lot was he used to lay in his lounge chair all day sunning, and he had a foil that he used to get sun underneath his neck. He made up a sign for the customers: take a ticket, park your own car, and oh yeah, have it validated. He was more interested in getting to know the starlets, one of which was Raquel Welch, who was very young at the time. They're both very young. So he convinced her to go out with him for a Coke right around the corner to the local restaurant. That's his claim to fame. I took over the parking lot in 1964. And some of my most favorite times there were taking a smaller lot and expanding it. It was a 44-car lot, but I figured out how to put 48 cars in there. My idea was more cars, more tips, better spend of my time. Some of my favorite people were not John Wayne, not Ernest Borgnine, but Dickie Smothers had a great 57 Porsche Speedster, just like the ones in the movies. And whenever he came in, I got to drive it. Then there was Pete Fonda had a Volkswagen Bug with flowers on the side. And he'd come in and he'd always say, "Hey Sam, there's a good roach in the ashtray, hit on it if you want." I never did, mark that baby. And then there was this starlet that would come in this old junky DeSoto fluid drive, a blue-gray color. But I could hear her coming from like a block away because the brakes were dragging. And I'd hear the screeching sound, and she'd pull in, and she was like taller than me. I'd look up at her and went, "Wow, very pretty, driving this piece of junk." So I parked the car, and when she came out, I just had to tell her, I said, "You know, miss, you really got to get your brakes fixed." She said, "It's a very dangerous situation." She said, "I can't worry about that now. When it dies, I'll just park it and get something else." Sure enough, a couple weeks later, she comes back in. She's driving a beat-up Volkswagen with the hood dented in like somebody had sat in it, but it did have brakes. Happens to be my wife right now. So, after a few years, my younger brother Tom took over, and his idea of the parking lot was part recreation and part business. He had fun with his friends drag racing Volkswagens in the middle of the parking lot. Through the years, the parking lot brought my family a lot of not only fun experiences, but a great learning curve for all of us boys. And those things that I took into my life helped me my whole life in even little ways. What I realized really was reaching out to people and connecting on a one-to-one basis is the most important thing that you can do in your life. No matter how difficult it is, you got to break the barrier, and once you get through, the benefits are really there. More recently, our daughter has been running a business out of our house, and she has 10 clients a day coming in, but no place to park because they're working on the street. So once again, the parking lot has come to me. I take those cars, I pull them around, I tell the people where to park. I'm happy again. Thank you very much.
Jimmy Stewart.
Oh, you want me to talk about
I
Jimmy
just
Stewart?
want you to say your favorite.
Okay. Jimmy Stewart was my guy. He was tall and thin, impeccably dressed, a real firm handshake. He'd look you in the eye, and he'd always say, "How you doing, Sam? What's going on? What you reading?" And it was really heartfelt. I always really liked connecting with him. Thank you for that.
Our last teller's quote, is this good, Tabitha?
It's okay.
Our last teller's quote is from Socrates. "'Tis a shame to grow old and never
never see the beauty and strength for which the body is capable. She tells a story entitled 1,000 Species of Love. Her name is Debbie Palmer Siegel. Where is she? Oh, right there.
1,000 species of love, pulsating with life, always present. But when I am consumed with the past, thoughts and deeds, there is no room for me to smell, feel, taste, or see that ever supporting love. Letting go of my pain, physically, emotionally, and mentally, creates an opening of the heart that expands, pulsates, and grows. After my brain surgeries, I was in constant physical and emotional pain. Looking in the mirror after my facial nerves were severed made me want to hide my face. I had to make a choice every time I looked in the mirror. I am that I am. The physical pain, constant migraines, and loss of hearing and balance was nothing compared to the emotional pain. I chose to let go. Letting go of beauty allows me to appreciate my own natural beauty. Letting go of youth allows me to be vibrant and young. Letting go of busyness allows me to be still and aware. Letting go of pride allows me to forgive. I'm learning to forgive myself and others. Letting go of pain allows me to heal. When the pain gets strong, I'm forced to slow down. Be still. This is easier said than done. It's so much easier to be busy, but who or what am I avoiding? Pain is my familiar. I was 6 years old with a new stepdad, a new home, a new school. I found comfort in my bed, breathing, stretching, and making all kinds of twists with my body. I was doing yoga before I knew what yoga was. Stretching, even then, eased my pain. Pain continues to motivate me to meditate and self-reflect. When my mother was dying, my back went out. I could not move a quarter of an inch without striking pain. I missed my mother's funeral because I couldn't move, let alone fly to another state. All the drugs in the world could not ease my pain. The numbing is comforting and addictive. Pain will ease, but usually returns when the numbing agents wear off. When I can conjure the courage to look inside and feel what's going on, relief comes. 1,000 species of love arise. Seeing how stress and emotion affects my emotional and mental accord allows me to settle in and be with my breath. My breath, it's my best friend. It's always available and easy to access. I just need to be still and be aware. Sometimes it's easier to distract myself than to be with myself. It's a lifelong process. I'm learning to accept and enjoy my own presence. Each time I slow down, I am at ease. The more ease I feel, the less pain I feel. The more I focus on my breath, the more I'm able to reach that place of calm and acceptance, even gratitude and bliss. The more gratitude I feel, the more I'm able to feel my heart, and it opens, allowing a place for me to feel love pulsating, a place where I can be of service. Being of service is a gift that fills my soul with joy. It grows I continue to give. I am grateful, and pain disappears. It grows as, pain has brought me to my knees. It humbles me so that I can receive divine nectar of healing love. This cycle of pain, self-reflection, breath, meditation, and service is a cycle that deepens my own self-awareness. I know pain is a motivating reality in my life. For that I say, thank you. I doubt that I'd ever meditate or self-reflect so often without such motivation. I wish I didn't need this pain, but I am grateful that I'm more loving, more healthy, and humble because of it. I appreciate who I am and all the wonderful beings in my life. Pain, like the Buddha said, is part of life. How I deal with it? As a key to my own bliss. That is empowering because I am the one who controls my breath. I am the one who controls my reactions. My reactions, I am the one who moves my body to ease its pain. I cannot control others. I can only control my reactions to others. My reactions are healthy when I'm comfortable in my own skin, my own emotions, my own mind. I'm comfortable when I dance. It's an evolving cycle where I'm learning to let go, slow down, and love myself more and more. As I love myself, I'm able to love and forgive others, and this brings me great comfort. The more I accept myself, the less judgmental I am. And that feels right. I am that. Letting go and feeling the love pulsating with life. Currently, I am facing the death of my twin sister, Anne. I am the eldest of 4 daughters and was raised to take care of my sisters. My twin is suffering. She is in hospice. The pain in my heart is threatening the pain in my back. I do yoga, go inside, and focus on my breath. It eases my heart and my back. I pray for Ruth Ann to feel the 1,000 species of love pulsating with life. I pray for her to feel the joy of God's love, of knowing God's love. And I pray for her to feel my unconditional love for her. My goal is to share as much joy with her as possible while she is still here. We did this recently as we danced together. Something we haven't done or shared since we were children. I helped her out of her wheelchair and played Keb Mo's song. She just wants to dance. As I moved my hips and parted my lips, you know, I was feeling fine. It was blissful. Dancing brought us both so much joy. Ruth Ann told me, Debbie, you turned my hell into heaven. That joy disintegrated pain. Dancing opens my heart and heals my body. It allows me to let go of all my pains, celebrating the joy my body brings me. It turns hell into heaven. This is the song by Keb Mo. She just wants to dance, so let's do it.
Yes, coming up.